Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The heavy oak doors of the Cathedral of St. Jude didn't just open. They groaned under the force of a desperate, violent kick, shattering the hushed sanctity of the ceremony with a sound like a gunshot. Rain lashed into the nave, a chaotic storm invading the climate-controlled perfection of the wedding of the century. But no thunder was as terrifying as the silhouette standing in the threshold. He was soaked to the bone, his cheap white dress shirt clinging to a shivering frame, his chest heaving as if he had run a marathon through hell just to reach this altar. Flashbulbs erupted like stroboscopic lightning, blinding and relentless, capturing the intruder's feral, desperate eyes. At the altar, the groom, Julian Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Heavy Industries and the city's most coveted alpha, froze. His hand, which had been moments away from sliding a diamond ring onto the finger of Isabella Ricci, hovered in midair. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and thick with the scent of distressed omega pheromones, a smell of burnt sugar and ozone that cut through the expensive perfume of the aristocracy like a jagged knife. "Don't," the intruder rasped, his voice broken but carrying to the vaulted ceiling. "Don't do it, Julian." Julian's eyes, usually the color of cold steel, narrowed. He recognized that voice. It was a ghost from a past he had buried under layers of whiskey and work. "Elias," Julian whispered, the name tasting like ash on his tongue. Beside him, Isabella, the epitome of bridal perfection in custom lace, clutched her rounded stomach protectively. "Security," she shrieked, her facade of grace cracking instantly. "Get this filth out of here. He's trying to hurt my baby." Four burly security guards, betas built like tanks, surged forward from the shadows of the transept. They moved to tackle the soaked Omega, Elias Vane, who stood trembling in the aisle. "Stop." The command was low, barely a growl, but it radiated such intense alpha authority that the guards skidded to a halt. Julian Thorne stepped down from the altar. The air in the cathedral grew heavy, the pressure dropping as Julian's dominance flooded the space. He ignored his fiancée's hysterical pleas. He walked down the velvet runner, his polished Oxfords clicking against the marble, until he stood inches from Elias. Elias looked wrecked. His honey-colored hair was plastered to his skull, water dripping down a face that was thinner, sharper than Julian remembered. He looked fragile, like fine china glued back together by sheer will. "You have 5 seconds, Julian said, his voice devoid of warmth. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't let them break every bone in your body for ruining this." Elias looked up, his eyes swimming with tears and a terrifying resolve. He didn't beg. He didn't kneel. Instead, he surged forward, grabbing the lapels of Julian's multi-thousand-dollar tuxedo, and yanked the alpha down. He kissed him. It wasn't a sweet kiss. It was a collision. It was a desperate, bloody claiming, a searing brand of possession that tasted of rain, copper, and years of suppressed longing. A gasp rippled through the hundreds of guests. For a heartbeat, Julian stood rigid, his hands twitching at his sides, fighting the instinct to shove the Omega away. But then, the scent hit him, the true scent beneath the distress. Vanilla and petrichor, the scent that had haunted his dreams for 3 years. Julian's control snapped. His hand shot up to grip the back of Elias's neck, locking him in place, deepening the kiss with a punishing intensity that bordered on violence. For a moment, the world dissolved. There was no wedding, no merger, no legacy. Just the friction of their lips and the undeniable, magnetic pull of a bond that had never truly severed. Elias broke the kiss first, gasping, his forehead resting against Julian's chest. He was shaking violently now. "She's not pregnant, Julian," Elias whispered, loud enough for the microphone near the altar to catch. The silence in the room was absolute. "Liar," Isabella screamed from the altar, her face twisting into something ugly. "He's a jealous whore, Julian. He's lying. Look at me." Elias pulled away from Julian, reaching into his soaked waistband. He didn't pull a weapon, but a crumbled, damp manila envelope. He shoved it into Julian's chest. "I know you think I took your father's money to leave you," Elias said, his voice gaining strength. "I know you hate me, but I couldn't let you bind yourself to a fraud." Julian opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the damp papers. A medical report. Dated yesterday. It's a prosthetic, Elias said, turning to face the crowd, his voice ringing out. A high-grade silicone mold. And the paternity test she showed you? Faked. She's been sleeping with your rival, Marcus Vane, my stepbrother, for 6 months. They planned to trap you, wait for the marriage contract to be signed, and then claim a miscarriage to keep the shares. Why now? Julian asked, his voice lethal. He looked up from the papers, his gaze piercing Elias. Why wait until the ceremony, Elias? You enjoy the theater? Because, Elias said, his gaze flickering to the press gallery where cameras were zooming in on the documents. If I came to you privately, your father would have buried it. He would have paid the doctors off, hushed the scandal, and forced the marriage anyway to secure the merger. I needed witnesses, Julian. I needed to burn the bridge so thoroughly that not even the Thorne family could rebuild it. It was a reckless, dangerous gamble. Elias had essentially nuked the social standing of two of the most powerful families in the city. He had made himself a target for life. Julian looked at the papers, then at Isabella. The bride was pale, her hand no longer clutching her stomach, but trembling at her side. She looked toward the side exit, where Marcus Vane had been sitting in the front row. The seat was empty. Julian let out a cold, dark laugh. He turned to Isabella. Is it true? Julian, baby, please, these are forged. Drop the dress, Julian commanded. What? The stomach. Drop the padding. Now. Or I will have security strip it off you in front of the live stream. Isabella froze. The game was over. The malice returned to her eyes, replacing the fear. She straightened up, her sweetness vanishing like smoke. You were always too cold to keep a woman anyway, she sneered. She reached under the layers of tulle and unhooked the complex strapping, letting the realistic silicone mold slide down her legs to the floor with a dull thud. The crowd erupted. Julian didn't look at her. He turned his back on the altar, on the church, on the life his father had arranged for him. He looked at Elias, who was swaying, adrenaline fading, leaving only exhaustion. The wedding is off, Julian announced to the stunned room. He took off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over Elias's shivering shoulders. Clear the room. Anyone who stays gets blacklisted from every industry I touch. He swept Elias up into his arms, bridal style, ignoring the Omega's weak protest. I can walk, Elias muttered, though his head lulled against Julian's shoulder. Shut up, Julian growled, stepping over the silicone belly on the floor. We have unfinished business. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the city skyline, a stark contrast to the Baroque excess of the cathedral. The storm was still raging outside, hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Julian dumped Elias onto the expansive leather sofa in the living room. He didn't offer a towel. He paced the room, radiating a predatory energy that made the air feel thin. He had loosened his tie, the silk hanging undone around his neck, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. You destroyed my reputation, Julian said, stopping by the liquor cabinet to pour a glass of amber liquid. He didn't pour one for Elias. I saved your life, Elias corrected, pulling the oversized tuxedo jacket tighter around himself. She would have destroyed the company from the inside. You left me. Julian turned, the glass forgotten in his hand. The anger was back, raw and bleeding. 3 years ago, you vanished. My father said you took a check for $5 million and a one-way ticket to Paris. I never saw a dime, Elias said quietly. Julian froze. What? Elias looked down at his hands. They were scarred, rougher than they had been when he was a pampered university student. Your father didn't pay me, Julian. He threatened to have my sister institutionalized. He had falsified records ready to go. He told me if I ever contacted you again, she would disappear into the system and never come out. Julian set the glass down. The sound of crystal hitting would echoed in the silent room. Why didn't you tell me? Because you couldn't beat him then, Elias said, looking up, his eyes weary. You were 24. He controlled your trust, your board, your life. If I fought, he would have hurt her. So I ran. I lived in a studio apartment in the East End. I waited tables. I waited for you to take the throne. Julian stared at him. The narrative of the last 3 years, the bitterness, the belief that Elias was a gold digger who had played him, crumbled into dust. He looked at the scars on Elias's knuckles, The cheap clothes, the shadows under his eyes. He had suffered. He had suffered in silence to protect what Julian loved. And today? Julian asked, his voice softer, dangerous. Why today? My father is still powerful. My sister died 3 months ago, Elias said, his voice cracking. Pneumonia. Her immune system was weak. A tear escaped, tracking through the rain-dried grime on his cheek. He has no leverage on me anymore. I have nothing left to lose, Julian. Except you. The admission hung in the air. Except you. Julian moved. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, looming over the sofa. He didn't touch Elias gently. He gripped his chin, tilting his head back, forcing eye contact. You think you can just storm back in here, blow up my life, tell me you're a martyr, and I'll just accept it? Julian hissed. I don't expect anything, Elias whispered, his pulse hammering against Julian's thumb. I just couldn't watch you marry her. I would rather you hate me and be free than love her and be a prisoner. I never loved her. The words were spoken against Elias's lips. Julian crashed down on him, not with the performative violence of the church, but with a starving, consuming hunger. He kissed Elias as if he were trying to breathe him in, to replace the oxygen in his lungs with Elias's scent. Elias made a wrecked sound in his throat, his hands coming up to tangle in Julian's hair. The dynamic shifted. This wasn't just passion, it was a reckoning. Julian pushed Elias back against the leather, his weight heavy and grounding. You foolish, self-sacrificing idiot, Julian murmured against his neck, biting lightly at the sensitive pulse point, eliciting a shiver that racked Elias's body. Did you really think I wouldn't have burned the world down for you if you had just told me? You needed the company, Elias gasped, arching into the touch. You needed to be the CEO. I have the company now, Julian growled. His hands moved to the buttons of Elias's wet shirt, popping them open with impatient efficiency. I have the power. And now, I have you. He pulled back, looking down at Elias. The Omega's chest was bare, pale and shivering, marked with the fading bruises of a hard life. Julian traced a scar on Elias's collarbone with his thumb. You're staying, Julian stated. It wasn't a question. The scandal, Elias worried, his hands resting on Julian's chest. The board will be furious. The stock prices will tank. Let them tank, Julian said dismissively. I'll buy back the shares at a discount. By next week, I'll own 51% outright. As for the scandal, let them talk. They'll say the CEO of Thorn Industries was so captivated by his former lover that he left a fraud at the altar. It's romantic. The public loves a redemption arc. And your father? Julian's eyes darkened. A cruelty surfaced there, a promise of retribution. My father is currently dealing with the fallout of the fake pregnancy he likely helped orchestrate. By the time I'm done with him, he'll be lucky if he's allowed to manage a lemonade stand. Julian leaned down, his forehead resting against Elias's. You aren't running again, Elias. I'm going to put a ring on your finger that is so heavy you won't be able to lift your hand to wave goodbye. You are mine. You have always been mine. Elias let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 years. The fight went out of him, replaced by a profound, bone-deep relief. He wrapped his arms around Julian's neck, pulling him down. Then claim me, Elias whispered. Make it so everyone knows. Julian didn't need to be told twice. The storm outside raged on, thunder shaking the windows, but inside the penthouse, the atmosphere was scorching. Clothes were discarded, wet fabrics replaced by the heat of skin on skin. It was a slow, deliberate reclaiming. Julian worshipped every inch of Elias, kissing every scar, erasing the memory of the last 3 years with every touch. When Julian finally entered him, Elias cried out, not in pain, but in a shattering sense of completion. It was a slow burn, a deep, grinding rhythm that spoke of ownership and permanence. They moved together on the wide leather sofa, the city lights blurring in the background, 2 broken halves finally snapping back together. Later, much later, the rain had stopped. The city below was a grid of glittering gold. Elias lay curled against Julian's side, wrapped in a silk duvet Julian had dragged from the bedroom. He was drifting on the edge of sleep, warm and safe for the first time in forever. Julian was awake, one arm draped possessively over Elias's waist, the other scrolling through his phone. What is it? Elias mumbled sleepily. The press release, Julian said, a smirk touching his lips. My PR team is spinning this as a triumph of true love over corporate deceit. The internet is calling you the runaway groom's savior. Approval ratings for Thorn Industries are actually up by 3 points. Elias chuckled softly, burying his face in Julian's neck. Only you could turn a disaster into a profit. I'm an alpha, Julian said simply, kissing the top of Elias's head. I protect what's mine, and I profit from my enemy's mistakes. Julian set the phone down and tightened his grip. Go to sleep, Elias. Tomorrow, we go to war with my family. But tonight, you're just home. Elias closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of sandalwood and rain. He knew the battles ahead would be brutal. The Thorn family wouldn't go down quietly, and the media would be relentless. But as he felt the steady, powerful beat of Julian's heart against his back, he knew they had already won the only war that mattered. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Elias take control, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a partner who hid the truth to protect you? Or is a lie always a deal breaker? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece. Best quality. High-res. 1.2. Korean manhwa style. Semi-realistic. Digital art. 2 men. BL. Yaoi. Man 1. Julian. Tall alpha male. Sharp jawline. Cold blue eyes. Wearing unbuttoned expensive tuxedo. Black hair slicked back. Dominant stance. Expression of shock mixed with intense desire. Man 2. Elias. Omega male. Shorter, slimmer build. Soaked white dress shirt clinging to skin. Honey-colored wet hair. Water dripping. Fierce and desperate expression. Grabbing Man 1 by the lapels. Background is a grand Gothic cathedral interior. Blurred guests in pews. Stained glass windows. Dramatic lighting from camera flashes. High contrast. Cinematic composition. Emotional atmosphere. Detailed textures of wet fabric and suit material.